Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for being here with us. We're going to give it just a minute to get everyone connected, so please stand by. Thank you. All right, well, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Laura Mon Ginsberg. My pronouns are she and her, and I serve as the National Council of Jewish Women's Board of Directors President. So excited to be with all of you today, especially as we join together to talk about an important conversation about safety on campus, including combating anti-Semitism and sexual violence, while we protect the rights of all students. Before we get started, I want to share some brief reminders. You can find closed captioning at the bottom of your Zoom. And as you can also see, we have an ASL interpreter with us. Thanks, Daniel. We have questions for our speaker that were inputted when folks registered. Please feel free to add additional questions in our Q&A function. We'll cover as many as we can when we get to that portion of our conversation. This convening is a 501c3 nonpartisan event. That means that we will neither take positions regarding political parties nor endorse candidates. Finally, today's event is being recorded. So with that, let's get started. For over 130 years, National Council of Jewish Women has worked to protect the rights of women, children, and families. We have partnered with the Department of Education in almost every administration, advocating to ensure robust laws, policies, and programs are in place to address sexual assault on campuses and provide survivor-centered responses, and advance policies that shield all students, including Jewish students, from discrimination. Our community watched in pain last year, particularly this past spring, as Jewish students on campuses across the country were targeted based on their religion and faced new levels of anti-Semitism. Many of us here, myself included, have students in our lives who were deeply impacted by the events of last semester. And as our students now return to school, we're all hoping for a better, safer year where our loved ones and community members can learn and thrive. On today's call, we will address issues impacting the safety of all students. During this particularly tense and difficult period on campuses, we are so grateful that United States Department of Education is working with us to respond and meet this moment. We're excited to have an exclusive opportunity to hear firsthand from Deputy Secretary of Education, Cindy Marten, in conversation with NCJW's CEO, Sheila Katz. You already know Sheila Katz, who in addition to being a former elementary school teacher, also spent 13 years working on college campuses and has critical expertise on the issues students face and the tools and resources needed to support them. Deputy Secretary Marten formerly served as the superintendent of the San Diego Unified School District and has spent 34 years as an educator, holding various roles of increasing responsibility, including as a teacher, literacy specialist, vice principal, and principal. During today's conversation, we will learn what the Department of Education is doing to better protect all students and, of course, answer the questions that you have. With that, it's my pleasure to hand things over to Deputy Secretary of Education, Cindy Marten, and NCJW CEO, Sheila Katz.
Thank you, Laura. Thanks for that introduction. And I'm so honored to be here with U.S. Deputy Secretary of Education, Cindy Marten. And thank you, Daniel, our ASL interpreter. You all know this. You've heard me say this. Right now, nowhere in the United States feels safe for Jewish people. And college campuses have really never been safe when you think about it for women. And so there's a lot to discuss today, and there's no one better to discuss it with than Deputy Secretary Marten. So thank you again for being here. It's so meaningful. I've gotten to know you, but for everyone else, it's so meaningful to have you in your leadership position at the Department of Education, given how you lead with your values and are so incredibly inclusive. And obviously, we always love seeing Jewish women leading and making great change. So why don't we start, before we get into the heavy issues we're about to, with you sharing with everyone here about your career and personal journey and what drives you to do this work.
Thank you, Sheila. I just love being in this space with you, and our regular conversations, getting to know each other over the last year or so has been phenomenal. So just to start by saying being able to be in partnership matters to me, and that's sort of what's defined my whole career. I was a teacher and taught in the classroom for 17 years. This is my 35th first day of school, so to speak, because it's back to school season, and we just completed our back to school bus tour with Secretary Cardona. But I spent 17 years as a classroom teacher and then became a principal at an inner city school in San Diego. That's where I'm from, San Diego, California. I was quickly going through the list of attendees, trying to find my San Diego friends. And I didn't get through it fast enough. So if there's any of my San Diego friends online, I will ultimately hear about it later, because anytime any of my San Diego people show up on one of my meetings, then they text my mom, who's very active in the Jewish community in San Diego. I saw your daughter on a call with the Jewish leaders today, and my mom gets very happy about that. So my mother has been involved in Jewish leadership and leading in San Diego for a long time. She was temple president at Temple Emmanuel in San Diego, which is my home temple. Rabbi Marcus is the rabbi there now. Rabbi Lawson was a rabbi before, but and my mom was also the president of Jewish Family Services in San Diego. She's now since retired from that, but still very active in the Jewish community. And my first 7 years of teaching were at Beth Israel Day School, a private Jewish day school in San Diego. I should say my mom's name. My mom is Fern Siegel, for those that may know her. She loves when I give her a shout out, or else she doesn't. I don't know what, but it's making our Jewish mothers proud is always going to be what we do. I should have given her the link and just let her join, Sheila. Should have thought of that. She would have loved that.
We'll send her the recording. It'll be good.
And she will watch it and she'll give me all the feedback, because you know what moms do. Anyway, that was my first 7 years of teaching. We're at a private Jewish day school in San Diego, and then continued to teach for 7 more years before going into administration and being a principal at an inner city school. And really what drives my work is always remembering every single day who I work for. I have had multiple jobs over my 35-year career, but I have done the same work, no matter what my job title has been: teacher, literacy specialist, vice principal, principal, superintendent of San Diego Unified School District. I did for 8 years before coming here to serve as Deputy Secretary of Education. All of those are big titles, especially like Deputy Secretary of Education. That's way too many syllables. Superintendent of 200 schools. At the end of the day, I'm a teacher. And the job versus the work that I've done is to work for students and to create equitable learning conditions, whether that was my own little kindergarten classroom with 25 kindergartners or a school district with 100,000 students, are now leading at the national level. How are we creating systems of support? My background is preschool through 12th grade. The Department of Education obviously goes through higher ed. There is an undersecretary for higher education. My portfolio is within the P-12 space, but we all work together, and that's what's driven my work since I've started. Wanted to be a teacher since I was 5 years old, so I still consider myself a teacher.
Are a teacher, and I'm glad we could help make Fern Siegel proud. So everyone say hello to Deputy Secretary Martin's mother. And being a teacher is the hardest job ever, and we'd do a lot better if we had more teachers in government and in roles, decision-making roles in government, politicians, etc. And we need them to be teaching our students too, because it's where so much happens in forming who our young people are and how they learn how to be in the world. So thank you for what you did then. Thank you for taking that experience to what you do now. Let's dive in to, I think, the topic we know a lot of people are thinking about as we get back to school, in the current moment that we find ourselves in, which is around anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism in our country has been steadily on the rise for years. And it actually, to the FBI and others, it skyrocketed in the aftermath of October 7th. And this past spring, as Laura was saying, we really watched in pain as our Jewish students on campuses in particular across the country, but also in K-12, were impacted by anti-Semitism. And the Department of Education, in particular through you, has had a crucial role in responding to this crisis and supporting Jewish students and all students experiencing hate. So can you tell us how you've been seeing anti-Semitism play out on campuses, and how you and the Department of Education have been navigating this surge of anti-Semitism?
I mean, one of the most important ways to first think about this question is what I said in the beginning, remembering who I work for, it's our students. And for me to describe what I've been seeing and how this is playing out on campuses, like you asked, I channel in the students' voices of the actual students I've been talking to. And one of the most impactful statements one of the students made on multiple roundtables and discussions I've been having on with all kinds of Jewish leaders, but mostly with the students, the most impactful statement a student said is, you know what, all of the adults around this topic are talking about us. And this student said, thank you for talking to us or with us, because we were hearing directly from the students on what their lived experiences are on the campus. And so I say that by way of saying that I have personally been in very regular contact with Jewish community leaders, you of course included, and staff at the department here, that the Department of Education. We have continued to find the right ways to connect with Jewish students on an ongoing basis, not a check the box, one and done. Okay, we talked to them, let's move on. I'm talking to students, I'm talking to educators, the teachers in the classroom, and the school leaders and superintendents and school board members and other community leaders, so that we can stay close to where the issue is. As a teacher, we call it proximity, in the classroom, when you're supposed to be listening to the teacher and you're not paying attention and the teacher comes close to your desk and you're like, oh, that's called proximity. What we want to do is be as close to the problems that we're trying to support and solve, so that we can be responsive to the experiences of anti-Semitism that our school communities are in the midst of. So some of the things that we're doing to navigate this surge of anti-Semitism, because nobody needs to question whether there's been a surge. There has been, unprecedented. And one of the things that we're doing is the implementation of the U.S. National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism. We released that in May of 2023, and that resulted in us launching here from the department our anti-Semitism awareness campaign. In fact, I kicked that off in September of 2023. It was less than 2 weeks before October 7th. It was in San Francisco at the Jewish Art Museum in San Francisco with a group of fourth graders. And I was highlighting how we can have anti-Semitism awareness campaign launch across our country to promote the first ever U.S. national strategy. Who knew that less than 2 weeks later, this was going to happen? But we are well on our way to addressing anti-Semitism in a systemic whole of government approach, thanks to the Biden-Harris administration's strategy here. So anyone on the call who has not already seen and supported and championed, trumpet as much as you can, the U.S. National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism, please download it, please look at it. There are things that community can do, that the Hill is in charge of doing, elected officials should be doing, what the department should be doing to combat or to counter anti-Semitism. So we launched that. But of course, since that happened in September 2023 in San Francisco, when I launched it, our work has truly just intensified. And so there's kind of two main, what's it called, like avenues of work. One is enforcement and one is support, when I think about the work of the Department of the federal government. And so our Office for Civil Rights is on the enforcement side of things, because we need to go in the heavy enforcement that is necessary to meet this moment. But it's also through support and education through our Office of Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. If all we did was enforcement, we would not be doing enough. If all we did was education and support and resources through the Center for Faith-Based Initiatives, we would not be doing enough. I feel like it's like Passover right now. Dayenu, like either one of those would have been enough. We need to do both, and we need to do both with strong conviction and intentionality. Support and enforcement need to happen concurrently. And so at the department, we've been working on doing all of that. From a support perspective, we have been staying in regular communication with leaders, both P-12 and higher education, hearing what their concerns are. We released our resource guide. It's called Free to Learn, Leading Inclusive Learning Environments in Higher Education. That's on the support side of things. The goal for that document was to ensure that campus leaders have the tools that they need to restore their learning environments that have been disruptive. And it gives them what they need to assess on their campuses as we released it over the summer. So as they were coming back for this fall, we didn't want to just like wait for the fall to come and say, oh no, we have a problem again. We released this guide that lets them assess their programs, their policies, their systems that they have in place so they can guide their institution's response to crises should they emerge again, which they likely were going to. One like really wonky thing on the last page of the Free to Learn document, we gave new guidance on how to enhance transparency around hate crimes that we think is really important for all of your listeners, stakeholders to know about. This is like universities are required through the Clery Act to report hate crimes on campuses. But what we did through this guidance is say that universities can voluntarily specify subcategories of groups that are being targeted on their campus based on their actual or perceived identity, such as religious or ethnic identity. So for example, a university could choose voluntarily through the Clery Act, they have to report, but they can go into one level of detail more and with specificity on the hate crimes involving anti-Jewish bias, rather than simply saying, well, there was a hate crime based on religion. That's a good data point. So that's another thing we've leaned in on in terms of the reporting. We've funded multiple technical assistance centers available to schools and institutes for higher education. That's helping them create, we have a center called the National Center for Safe and Supportive Learning Environments, have all kinds of tools and resources. And then we partnered with the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice and did a webinar this summer called Supporting Safe and Resilient Campuses, so that every agency's resources, we wanted a one-stop shop of where people could go, and you don't have to shop around the federal government to know what to do. We put all the resources in one place, and the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, spoke at that webinar along with our secretary. So all of that to say, these are like the enforcement things. We can get more into enforcement also later, but I think enforcement and support really matter here.
You just shared so much. And I feel like now if, NCJW is structured so that our headquarters often works with the federal government and departments here, and our folks at a local level are working more local and statewide, and we clearly have synergy, but they don't always get to be in these meetings with you. So I'm so glad they get to know you and hear this. I heard a few things I just want to reiterate that I think for our organizers who are joining here is just important to take the strategy that you're using that they get to use also. Like one you shared, have a proactive strategy, right? Before the fire, right? The national strategy to counter antisemitism, the whole of government plan that we worked on was something you had in place beforehand that we get to refer back to, that was groundbreaking and that still sets the guidelines of where you're going. I heard proximity, right, and centering the most impacted, reaching out to the students if it's about students, and the disability community. They like to say nothing about us without us. So remembering to include the right voices in the conversation. The support and enforcement, double edged, you can't do one without the other. And I just want to say, if you aren't already bought into why I think Deputy Secretary Marten is so amazing and what the Department of Education has been doing, it is a big deal to be able to launch a resource the way you did in the timeline that you did with the Free to Learn document. And so we'll make sure everybody here has all the resources that has been shared, that proactive strategy, the Free to Learn, and being able in government in such a quick turnaround to be able to segment the data this way is going to be able to help us learn about what's actually happening, who it's happening to, and to be able to understand it and address it. So for those who don't always work with the government departments in this way, it's a massive deal that they got this much accomplished in that much time. And we're truly grateful, and we'll make sure you all have it. I do want to dive in just a little bit more about Title VI, because it's something a lot of people are hearing about. So I'll let you explain it rather than me try to explain it. So tell us about Title VI, how the department is using it to protect students, and what other tools does the Department of Education have to be responding to the current situation that we're seeing, particularly on campuses, but also in K-12?
Yeah, so everything I just talked about during that first question was all about the resources and support that's out there. This gets into the enforcement side. When I said there's two big work streams here, this is the enforcement side of what we're doing through Title VI, because we have provided resources, education, outreach, training, all of that needs to happen. And that's what we're using to help students feel safe at school. But we need this other work stream around enforcement of Title V through the Office for Civil, through the Title VI, through the Office of Civil Rights. And if we don't talk about Civil Rights Act and what it does for people to truly understand that it prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin, including shared ancestry. We are very clear. And our Assistant Secretary, Catherine Lehman, has done multiple webinars and presentations on this, as she's also leading the largest enforcement effort we've seen in this area. And we have to lean in on this work because all education institutions, including pre-K, elementary and secondary public schools and school districts and public-private colleges, universities, other post-secondary institutions that receive federal financial assistance are required to comply with Title VI. So if you go to ed.gov right now, you can find the comprehensive overview of the actions that we've taken by the department to counter anti-Semitism and Islamophobia since October 7th. Our Office for Civil Rights has vigorously enforced the laws, and it's within our jurisdiction to protect every student to the full extent that Congress grants us this authority. So let me just break down the numbers. Our Office for Civil Rights have opened more cases on shared ancestry discrimination, including anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-Israeli, anti-Palestinian hate, and in this administration than any other prior administration. We have more than 145 cases in investigation today. That's the enforcement side. The previous administration opened 28. We have 145 currently being investigated. Our Office for Civil Rights has also already secured nearly 3 times as many resolution agreements from schools on these very topics than the past administration secured in all 4 years. And our Office for Civil Rights has shared guidance more than any other prior administration with every federally funded school in the country to remind them of their legal obligation to protect students' civil rights in this area. We have been clear-eyed and fierce in doing this work. We have also updated our complaint form so that we could include specifically how to address anti-Semitism as a form of discrimination prohibited under Title VI. And we continue to provide technical assistance so students know what their rights are and school leaders know what their obligations are. So that's the avenue for enforcement. I often say that if you haven't looked at the resolution agreements that have been reached, they are available online. And when I talk to school leaders, I say, read those. They can be the cautionary tale that do you need to wait to get into a resolution agreement with the Office for Civil Rights to know how to enforce and include the right actions to put this law in place? No, you can actually see the work in the resolution agreements. You can actually lead that work as a district leader or as a school leader. At this point, those resolution agreements give a great roadmap and great guidance.
I'm just something I want to point out because it's important because we were working on Title VI and we've worked with you on this. I'm so glad you mentioned the types of cases that came out because Title VI, since it's based on shared ancestry, of course, is what we're going to utilize in combating anti-Semitism and particularly pointing out, you all, I'm seeing some of these examples come up in the questions. There are more than enough examples of what's happening in schools that's harmful to Jewish students that could be reported and investigated and have responses to right away. And the same shared ancestry, kind of clause, I'll call it that, that's there about Jews also protects Muslim students from Islamophobia. And so it's helpful as we're doing our advocacy to remind ourselves that when we have protections for one minority group or a marginalized group, they often help multiple groups. And we're glad to see the Department of Education focusing on both and even more than just, it's not only a binary, you mentioned Palestinian, Israeli. Unfortunately, there are so many people that have been targeted since October 7th, and we certainly have empathy for the Muslim community as well and Arab students on campus, and want to remind everybody to really familiarize yourself with this kind of reporting because we need it reported in order to address it. And we did see an example, Deputy Secretary Marten, of a high-profile case that happened at Cornell with a student who threatened Jewish students and particularly said that they wanted to sexually assault all Jewish students on campus. That then was reported, investigated, and that student is actually in jail now as a result of these threats that took place there in partnership with the Department of Justice. So we are seeing the connections between all these things at the same time, leading to be able to address these things as seriously as possible because it's scary when these threats and things are happening. So thank you for sharing a little bit deeper. I feel like Title VI is newer in the vocabulary of what we're hearing the Jewish community in particular talk about. We want everyone on this call to be familiar with what Title VI does, who it protects, and the action actually has to be taken on the sides of the people who notice this behavior in order for it to be addressed. So it's very important in your communities that you know about this and talk about it. If it's okay, Cindy, Deputy Secretary Marten, I feel like we go way back. We like being very respectful of titles around here for women in leadership. But I wanted to transition a little into another title that we've heard a lot about. I think this group is a little bit more familiar on, but we're in the midst of some legality around it as well, which I'm not sure how much you can share, but that's Title IX. Right. So we've long worked with the Department of Education on addressing and preventing sexual assault on the college campus. And since we talked about Title VI, we thought maybe we'd jump a little into Title IX. And recently, as you know, NCJW, in partnership with the broader civil rights community, advocated for some new Title IX regulations, which were released but are now in the midst of legal review. So you'll tell us what you can say and not say. Can you share just a little bit of background for everybody here on Title IX protections for students and anything you can also share about the new regulations and where they stand?
Yeah, sure. Well, this administration has made Title IX protections stronger and more inclusive than ever before. The final regulations we published in April are the most comprehensive regulations since the first publication in 1975. And these final regulations build on the Title IX statutory guarantee that no person shall experience discrimination on the basis of sex by clarifying that Title IX's prohibition of sex discrimination includes all forms of sex discrimination. That's including sexual harassment and harassment based on sex stereotypes, sex characteristics, pregnancy or related conditions, and sexual orientation and gender identity. So as a full body here and working together as in our administration, we reject efforts that are politicizing Title IX and that end up sowing more division in our country. And that ends up being at the expense of all the progress that we've made in this area. So leading up to the effective date, OCR has released a collection of how-to resources. And I think you'll see that as a theme through all of my comments today. We are a team of educators. We don't like to just talk about what needs to happen and why it needs to happen. We like to get into how to actually do it. And you can get past the regulations and the laws into the full implementation of the how-to guides and resources. So leading up to the release date, that's why OCR released this collection of how-to resources so that we can support educators and administrators to know how to implement the new regulations. And we're also providing training. We love technical assistance so that students know their rights as well. And then school leaders need to know what their obligations are. So I guess conversations like this are also important for spreading the word. You and everybody on this call are essential advocates for gender equity in education and quite frankly beyond. So sometimes it can be frustrating that the number of states and advocacy groups have sued to stop the new regulations from going into effect, but OCR stands behind the 2024 regulations and we will vigorously enforce these really vital protections in every jurisdiction where we're not enjoined. And the Department of Justice is going to continue to defend the 2024 regulations in court on our behalf, so we can ensure that all of our nation's students can access schools that are safe, schools that are welcoming, and schools that respect their rights.
Thank you. It's so important. And I think, this week we're honoring and marking the 30th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act. And then more recently, there were some additions to it to make it even more inclusive. And there's even more that needs to happen. So Title IX, in a way, was groundbreaking, and there's more to do. And I would encourage people here, particularly those involved and active at a local and state level, to see where your state is on this right now, because the expansion to Title IX is really about protecting the LGBTQ community, which of course we want to do, right? Extending on the basis of sex to include gender identity and sexual orientation is very, very important, especially at a heightened time of trans kids being targeted, and they should be able to go to whatever campus they want to and whatever school they want to and live free of violence and live with all the protections that everybody else has. So I think we said it's about half of the states right now that are contesting this legally, and we're in the midst of watching to see what's going to happen, where this is going to land. And I know the Department of Education and everyone else will do everything they can to protect these students. But because it's ongoing, I would encourage everyone on this call to also pay attention to what's happening in your state and to see if there are things you could be doing to get involved, or at least be aware of how that can land and feel for LGBTQ students in this moment who are having this debate happen about them at that level. So, and we'll continue to do our work to expand this as much as possible. And lastly, you won't be surprised I'm going to say this, given the work I did on campus, we are in the midst of like a very challenging time, I would say, on college campus, what's referred to as the red zone, right? The time of the year between when college begins and Thanksgiving, when we have learned disproportionate numbers of sexual assault actually happens. The majority, I believe, of sexual assault on the college campus happens in this time period. And so it's very important that we continue to talk to people about sexual assault, that we continue to hold our schools accountable for these issues, and that all of us who have loved ones on campuses, that we understand what we can be doing to support our students in this moment. And Cindy, you were there in the meetings that we had with the Department of Education, even on Title VI, and we said, as we're talking about protecting Jewish students, that Jewish women on campus have really not been safe since long before a surge of anti-Semitism, because campus has always been a place where people have intentionally targeted young women in particular, first-year students in particular, first-year students, at fraternity parties in particular, around sexual violence. So it's all so much to hold, and we're grateful for all you're doing to try to make things safer for everyone. I wonder, so we're going to open it up to audience questions in a minute. I see them coming in. So this is my encouragement to everybody. Keep them coming in. Can't get to all of them, but we'll get to as many as possible soon. So I'll ask one more question, and then I'll read some of the ones that have come in. I've started to integrate in here a few things that I think our people can do. And so obviously at a national level, I'll look for any excuses to be partnering and working with you in your office to make K through 12 and campuses safer for students. At a local and state level, what's your best advice for what people on this call can do?
Well, you did just start to talk about it, actually. So let's start with the premise that we all believe that all students should feel safe and should be free from violence, harassment, intimidation on their campuses. So the fact that that's a should and not a it is, what does it actually take to make that happen? Because that is the vision of our country. That is what an education should be, free from violence and harassment and intimidation on their campuses. So when it's not, people have to act. So if you believe a student has been discriminated against because of their actual or perceived Jewishness, use or share the OCR complaint form, which we have widely distributed and made even easier to do. Put it out there, distribute it, make sure people are aware of it, because I think it's part of it, as you know, in your long career of raising awareness. When you raise awareness and people are aware of a course of action, that does help the collective good. So raising awareness about our OCR's Title VI complaint form and the process is the best way for the Department of Ed to respond to discrimination at schools. There's a process, they can fill it out, they can turn it in. We're also raising awareness and understanding of anti-Semitism is key. Like I said, you can't just do enforcement. You have to do that. And how do you raise awareness to understand what anti-Semitism is? It's a key to countering threats to safety and to values and making sure the rights of all Americans are respected. And NCJW's incredible affiliates, networks, you all are well equipped to respond to local issues with support and resources of a national organization. So I think continuing to raise that awareness matters. And I just have to always say, share our resources with your local schools, parents, guardians, community leaders, like everybody on this call. You are some of the best advocates of our work. We can produce resource guides and free to learns and webinars all day long. But if they don't make it to the local school leaders, to the superintendents, to the school principals, to the teachers groups love to learn about this, then it's not having the positive impact that it could. So I think that ultimately, like local is king. The local schools are responsive to the concerns of their community members, and they are the ones that can prioritize resources like the ones we've published when they hear about them from people like you. And so that matters. You leverage your networks, use your networks, promote the things that we've put out there and make them aware of it. And you can reference the extraordinary work that I think has been happening in your communities. If you see an example of somebody who has used the resource, share that. Use this opportunity to teach about anti-Semitism and all forms of hate, stand together to make all schools safe and inclusive learning environments, and lift up the examples of where it's going well and let people learn from each other in a wider community of practice.
Amen to that. And we're going to email out all the resources so you'll have it handy. And we're also going to share on social media this week some graphics and things that people can share about reporting these things so it's fresh on everyone's mind. And that's just a simple share. So we'll try to make it as easy as possible for everyone. Okay, we got a lot of questions here to go. We're only going to get to a few. And now I know you're all interested. We knew you were interested before. We'll see what we could do to continue to engage on this. I feel not surprised by this question that came in, but I'm very curious your response. So one of our advocates in Florida asked about book bans in K through 12 schools. So what's your role with what I would refer to as book bans? And what do you make of the increase in bans on books in schools right now?
I get that question a lot, and it's a fair question. People want to know, like, what can we do about that? So first of all, I have to just make people don't always understand that when we talk about curriculum that's happening in schools, we have to understand that that is specifically a state and local issue, not a federal issue, because the department can't and does not mandate, direct, or control local curricula. That's how we are set up as a country. But at the same time, let's be clear that schools that receive federal funding must comply with Title VI's requirements to address a hostile learning environment on the basis of shared ancestry. So our Office for Civil Rights could investigate a complaint that includes the removal of books or other aspects of a school's program or activities if it's contributing to a hostile environment. So our Office for Civil Rights does not have a jurisdiction to enforce the First Amendment. The Department of Justice has jurisdiction over certain complaints of religious discrimination, and therefore our Office for Civil Rights refers that type of complaint of discrimination based exclusively on religion to the Department of Justice, if that helps like understand where these things live in terms of what we can and can't do and where we can step in. When we limit access to those materials, and we know books about the Holocaust or even about Shabbat have been banned in the past, we close off conversations about things that might be difficult and deprive them of a well-rounded education. So we have to lean in on the value there. And then on the other hand, when students see themselves reflected in the books that they read, that helps. Learning outcomes in school attendance actually increases when you have an inclusive set of materials and books that students are able to read and they see themselves reflected in those books. That matters, and it makes a difference for students' long-term outcomes.
Thank you. It also reminds me in the Jewish community, if people don't know, a great resource if you have young kids or grandkids is PJ Library that you could sign up for free. And one of the things we know about it and all their data is if kids read stories about other Jewish families, or they see stories where there are two dads or two moms, that they're able to see themselves in it. And there's a lot of data that they can grow in their identity. And particularly, they've been studying Jewish identity. So people don't know about that. It's not about schools, but another organization I really admire. I do want to name, there are some questions coming in that I'm intentionally not asking because I know Deputy Secretary Marten actually can't answer because of ongoing legal cases. So I know a lot of you have been asking very specific questions about very specific campuses. We all know which ones they are, but we're not going to go into those specific details because they are doing their job in the midst of this and can't quite respond. But I'm noting it and saying it out loud because it sounds like there's interest in getting a little deeper of how we could be supportive of parents in some of these places. And I'm going to put a pin in that for now, and we'll figure out how to circle back with you on that. But I do have a few questions actually in response to the recent school shooting in Georgia and just about gun violence generally. What I'm noticing in the Q&A coming in is that many on this call have kids or grandkids who are survivors of school shootings and who are growing up in a world where this is the status quo. And I'm also seeing a lot of people commenting that we're talking a lot about the students, but we have a lot of teachers on this call too, who are also navigating this. So can you share just a little bit about the Department of Education's role in gun violence prevention? And sadly, because of its prevalence at this time, what's your role in the aftermath of these kinds of shootings with emotional and mental well-being for students and for teachers and faculty?
Thank you, Sheila, for this question. The shooting happened when the Secretary of Education and I were in the midst of our back to school bus tour in schools, on campuses across the country, celebrating back to school when this news came in. And I have to say, I was absolutely devastated to hear about this shooting in Winder, Georgia. It's so heart-wrenching to hear about children and educators whose lives, they're just cut short for no reason. And I have to say, our heart is always going to go out to the families, to the communities as we learn the stories. We have to put a stop to this gun violence. And what do we actually do? What can we do? Too many students have experienced this gun violence, resulting in ongoing trauma and grief for the families, for the community. Long term, it undermines their ability to thrive. And this is what adds to the youth mental health crisis. So Secretary Cardona and I are very clear. We stand with President Biden. He's been very clear on his push to renew the assault weapons ban, to require safe storage of firearms, to enact universal background checks, and to end immunity for gun manufacturers. President Biden's been clear, and Secretary Cardona and I stand with those thoughts. In the meantime, we're doing everything we can within the authorities that we do have to support students and educators. So we have distributed more than $2 billion in funding that came through the historic Bipartisan Safer Community Act to help schools raise the bar in the ways that they're going to support students' physical safety as well as mental health. It's not just physically secure the buildings and we're good to go. There's so much more to this. That's why this historic Bipartisan Safer Community Act, $2 billion, it included $1 billion for training and hiring mental health professionals. We're expecting that's going to translate to 14,000 more mental health professionals going into our K-12 schools. That matters. Then there's an additional $1 billion that's helping schools shore up security in whatever ways local communities decide that they want to do that. But there are dollars there to make that happen because schools might want to institute different security measures to build safer, more welcoming and positive learning environments. We also are collaborating with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services that effort is about increasing access to the benefits of the Medicaid program. That sounds really wonky, but what that actually translates to is it helps schools provide health and mental health services at school. And traditionally, schools have been afraid to access Medicare dollars and having there be double dipping of funds and all that. We have partnered with the agencies, with Health and Human Services, that realizes you can tap into these funds, and this brings more mental health services into schools. Kids might not go outside of schools to get it, but when you provide the services right there at school, you're more likely to provide the support where and when needed. And then specifically, one thing we do, unfortunately, when we have to react, when the horrific happens, when a disaster like this strikes, we reach out immediately to offer support. We can do it financially through a grant program that's called Project Serve. And then we can provide ongoing technical assistance to the schools that are facing the unthinkable. We know that the whole school community feels the impact of gun violence for years after the incident has happened. The day is over, the week is over, the month is over, you open schools, but it becomes multi-generational trauma in a community. And there is support through Project Serve to support them over the long term.
Thank you for acknowledging the kind of the long-term impact. I feel like in today's world, a shooting happens and it's not even in the news in the next hour because we've become so, I don't want to say this group has become numb to it because we haven't, but it's become so normal in the worst of ways. And so for everyone here, NCJW advocated for the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. We were there at the White House, when it was celebrated, and we'll continue to work in partnership and advocate for these things because these should be places where people can learn and grow and be safe and thrive. And so I know we didn't get to all the questions today. We're gonna ask one final question. And really in this chat, I just wanted to reflect back from what I'm seeing from these questions is a lot of pain on violence, whether that be sexual assault, gun violence, anti-Semitism, lots of pain, separation of church and state, feeling hurt as people in a minority religion, people feeling hurt because of their gender identity. I don't think we knew we were going to get questions, but I didn't quite expect to see people say, this is hard for me, and this hurts me, and this hurts my family. And so I just want to honor, the stories and the things that people have shared in this Q&A and reflect back that we see them. And we're so grateful to have Deputy Secretary Marten as our partner in trying to make things safer and better for all of us. So we're going to close with this question. You can add anything else that you want to add if there's something that we didn't get to that you wanted to. And then Laura will come back on and kind of close us out, share next steps. If you could wave a magic wand, which I wish we all had this ability, but if you could wave a magic wand and have schools and universities be everything they were always meant to be, what would that look like to you? And what would be the same and different than how they are currently right now?
I love any kind of magic wand, even though is that actually possible? But I always lead from that place of what is it that we're wanting to see in the world? And I've learned that there are different kinds of people in the world, and some people need to see it to believe it, and other peoples can believe something into being. And if it's not yet exactly the conditions that you see and hold in your heart for students, then manifest that. And that doesn't just happen because you wave a wand. It happens because you get into community, you cast the vision of the reality that you want to see, the ideal state, and you begin to build towards that. And what I can say is the ideal state, does it ever exist anywhere? Maybe not, but there are examples where people have gotten closer to the ideal state of an inclusive learning environment where students are known by name and by strength and by need. Their family histories and stories are honored and recognized and brought into a whole beautiful fabric of a school community. And there are great examples of that. The problem is that anytime there is an anti-Semitic incident at a school is one time too many. And they're going to continue to happen. But at the same time, since there are examples of many colleges, universities, K-12 places that are getting it right on most days for most students, lean in on that. It's a theory of action in teaching. We call it appreciative inquiry. The research on it is called positive deviance. But basically, appreciative inquiry is what you appreciate is what grows. If you pay attention to what's working, you're going to get more of what's working. If you pay attention to what's not working, you get more of what's not working. What you appreciate appreciates. It's what grows. Positive deviance is you take a deviant example, meaning it's different from the norm, it's getting positive results, and then you replicate and scale that. It's not about creating something that doesn't yet exist. It's about helping others rise to the examples of good models and getting more of those good models. That's the human-centered work that we can all do together.
Let it be so. And if I had a magic wand to give, I'd hand it to you. So thank you again for being with us today, Deputy Secretary Marten, and for all you're doing every single day on our behalf with us, sometimes pushing in rooms that we don't see to try to make things safer for students on our campuses and in K through 12. And with that, I'm going to turn it to NCJW's President, Laura Mon Ginsberg, to wrap us up.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that, Sheila, and a tremendous thank you to Deputy Secretary Marten and Sheila, of course, for their continued leadership, insights, and dedication, ensuring every student is safe from harassment and discrimination, thriving on their campuses. We're really grateful to have been with all of you today. I want to give a special thank you to our ASL interpreter, Daniel, for being with us for the duration of this call, all the NCJW staff behind the scenes here, pulling this off, and of course, to all of our fabulous advocates who joined us today. We know many of you are teachers, parents, administrators, and are working at schools and campuses yourselves. So we appreciate your support, certainly, and also your service. We urge you to share the resources that we discussed today with your communities and continue to have conversations with students in your lives, family, friends, neighbors, perhaps while you're gathered for high holidays in your community. Make sure that the students that you know they are loved and supported and that there are resources to help them. We're glad that you were able to join us today for this important and timely conversation. We'll send a follow-up email with the recording of the session, resources, and of course, ways to take action. Please don't hesitate to reach out to NCJW if we can be of service in any additional way. With that, thanks for being here and have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.